as we have a good friend of ours joining us once again. Sue Woody from the Des Moines Public Library is back with us once again, and you brought a very special guest.
Yes, I did. We are so pleased to bring Christina Kline to Des Moines for our Author Visiting in Des Moines series.
Very excited to be here.
And
wonderful.
you're going to be available for people to meet you a little later on.
Yeah, I have a whole fun presentation. It's a slideshow. I wrote a novel that is about a little-known piece of American history, so I'm going to be talking about that.
What's the name of your novel?
It's called Orphan Train, and it's about, essentially, the story is 250,000 children were sent on trains from the East Coast, mostly New York, to the Midwest over 75 years, ending in 1929. And these children populated the Midwest. It was a labor program until the age of 18 or 21.
Really?
They were indentured, contracted. So it's kind of this crazy little-known bit of American history that actually has yielded more than 4 descendants.
So first of all, why did you want to write about a topic like this, and why is this such a little-known part of our history here in America?
Those are the 2 huge questions, and I'll answer them tonight at length. But I got into it because I stumbled on an article about my husband's grandfather, who ended up in Jamestown, North Dakota on a train with his siblings. And it was this article about orphan train riders, and it was in this little town of Jamestown where my mother-in-law grew up, and yet she'd never heard of the orphan trains. So that was how it began.
Okay.
And then I guess the other part I'll really be focusing on tonight is how and why I took all this nonfiction material and made a novel out of it, because a lot of people would have probably written a history book.
Right, exactly.
As you said, you're going to talk more in length tonight at Central Library, and we'll get all the details here in a moment. But how were you able to do research on this if it is such a little-known aspect of our history?
You know what you find when you write books is that there are these pockets that people generally don't know a lot about, and it's kind of the way it is when you do genealogical research as well. You go down a rabbit hole and you discover there's a world of people who do know. So I always say this has been hidden in plain sight. There are organizations that I became part of. There's a National Orphan Train Complex, which is in Concordia, Kansas.
Wow.
There are reunions that people go to.
Really?
In
I never
New York,
even heard of this.
In
like
the
descendants
Midwest.
of these
Yes.
relatives.
Well, here's the incredible thing. When I started this book, there were about 150 living train riders, because it ended in 1929.
Okay.
Today there are fewer than 10.
Wow.
And they're between 95 and 105 years old. So I stumbled on this story at a moment when I could be a part of living history.
Have you talked to those remaining people at all?
Yes, I had the great privilege of interviewing. I met 11 train riders before I published the book. I interviewed 7 of them. But then traveling around the country, I have met train riders, believe it or not, still, and descendants. So many descendants. So it's amazing.
How vivid are their memories from way back when?
You know, I'll tell a story tonight about one train rider in particular who, at the age of 93, was able to articulate her memories so vividly that I had to go back and change my book after talking with her. I had already written a draft. Yes.
Really?
And many of them wanted to forget. So their memories are a little cloudy because they're sort of like, I don't want to even think about that time anymore. It was traumatic for a lot of them. But this one train rider that I spoke with at the end, I have this whole story about her because my book was almost done, and you know, I stumbled on her and I was like, oh, I just don't want to interview one more person. But I'm so glad I did, because her story transformed my narrative. I kind of got at the emotions of what it would really feel like to be an orphan train rider.
Besides this one incredible story that you need to go and check out tonight by listening to this incredible author, what's one thing that really surprised you from doing all this research, interviews, things like that?
I think what surprised me the most is 2 things quickly. Number one, the history of our country is not the history of the poor and the dispossessed. It's the history of presidents and generals and wars and treaties and laws and the Supreme Court and robber barons and the wealthy. But the stories of people like this, the poor immigrants who came pouring into America at the turn of the century, have never really been told in the history books. So we have this big story that's never been part of the official history. So that, I would say, is a huge surprise.
Pretty
and then the other thing I think that was just astounding to me is that every immigrant group that comes to the country undergoes a hazing process. And it's as true today of Muslims and Mexicans as it was 100 years ago with the Irish in particular, who were treated terribly, the Polish, Jewish and Italian settlers. And I think the same people who are advocating strict regulations, many themselves are descended from immigrants who had a tough time when they got here. So part of what I show tonight is the immigrant experience at the turn of the century.
What will people take away from after reading the book?
I think what they'll take away from reading the book, the big picture, is that you need to dig beneath the surface of what we're told in the histories, and that there are all these stories about Americans that we don't know. And still today, every day, in fact, people come to me with stories. But there are so many novels to be written about little known aspects of American history, and it's pretty exciting.
All right, we don't want to give away too much, Sue, because we want people to come out tonight to Central Library. So tell us about this great event.
Well, this event will be at 7 o'clock at Central Library, and we've got plenty of parking. We do have parking in our parking garage below the library, as we do every day.
That's right.
Don't forget
yeah.
about that parking.
Yeah.
On-street parking, but Principal has also let us have their lot between 10th and 11th on Grand Avenue for this event. So we'll have lots of overflow parking. The doors open at 6 o'clock, and the presentation will begin at 7 p.m.
Wonderful. And Christina, if we want to check out your book, where would we be able to find it? Everywhere,
Anywhere.
hopefully.
At the library.
The library would be a good starting
there'll be
place,
books for
wouldn't it?
sale.
And Beaverdale Books will be selling books
Oh,
that
wonderful.
the author will be able to autograph as well.
Well, Christina, thank you for coming in.
it's lovely
It was
to
a
be here.
pleasure meeting you. Thank you so
Thanks
much
for
for being
coming
here.
in.
Good to see you, Sue.
Thank you for inviting.